Without further delay, thank you again for joining Advocates for Ohio's Future State Budget 101 webinar. Today, our speakers are going to share an overview of the state budget process, where to find budget resources and how to use them, how you can be an effective advocate, and how to engage with your elected officials. If you've never been on a webinar with AOF before, I want to share a little bit about who we are. Advocates for Ohio's Future is a statewide nonpartisan coalition of over 485 organizations and thousands of individual advocates like you who focus on making Ohio a great place to live and work. So that means we focus on policies that help Ohioans participate in the economy, be healthy and safe in their communities, and afford the basics like food, housing, healthcare, and transportation. After the webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with the slides, a webinar recording, and other resources, and you'll also be included on our email list where you'll receive periodic email alerts, invitation to other webinars, and new resources that will help you advocate for policy in Ohio. We hope that you'll continue to stay connected and advocate with us, but there's an opportunity to unsubscribe at any time using the link we include in every email. We're excited to present today's webinar with our longtime partners at the Center for Community Solutions. We'll hear first from Tarter, Britton, the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy, and then from William Tarter, Policy and Planning Associate in Community Advocacy. Without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to Tara to give us an overview of how Ohio State budget is negotiated. Tara, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Becca, and thanks for having us today. Like Becca said, I'm Tara Britton. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for the Center for Community Solutions. Community Solutions provides strategic leadership and organizes community resources to improve health, social, and economic conditions through demographic research, nonpartisan policy analysis and advocacy, and communication. We have offices in Columbus, where I am, along with a few others, but our main office is in Cleveland, so we are widely available around the state through in-person meetings and obviously available by phone, and can help folks understand the budget process, and especially as it relates to health and human services. So thank you to Becca and later to Will for putting this presentation together today, and I will jump right into the process that the state budget goes through. So this is kind of a timeline slide. As many of you know, the governor introduced his final budget, what will be Governor Kasich's final budget, at the end of January, so just a few months ago. That budget bill, and this is the process that any budget bill goes through, and Ohio does biennial budgeting, so that happens every 2 years, every odd year. The budget moved into the House of Representatives, and the budget bill was labeled House Bill 49. Once it's introduced, it's referred to the House Finance Committee, so any bill that deals with money, typically that's where it goes. That happened in early to mid-February. Because the budget is such a large, it's dealing with a lot of funding issues, but it's also dealing with really complex policy proposals. The budget is separated out into different subcommittees. So the House Finance Committee creates subcommittees on various topics, including health and human services, education, higher education, and others, to cover all of the different areas of the budget and really be able to delve into the details. We've been closely monitoring what's happening in specifically the Health and Human Services Subcommittee, but I know many of you are interested in other subcommittees as well. I have highlighted or bolded the area where the budget is right now. The budget bill has made its way through the subcommittee process and has returned to the full Finance Committee. So this week, and in a later slide I have the schedule for this week, but the House Finance Committee is hearing public testimony on the budget right now. That just concluded a little bit ago, but that's where the budget stands right now. In the Finance Committee, changes are made to the bill and a substitute bill is reported out. So there are a couple of opportunities at this stage that make amendments are proposed and are accepted into the bill. So that's how we get to a substitute bill. The substitute bill is reported out to the full House of Representatives from the House Finance Committee, and the House of Representatives passes the budget bill. We're actually, this timeline has kind of changed a few times as we have gone through the budget process, and we're now hearing that it's going to be early May that the House of Representatives passes a budget bill, and then it will head over to the Senate. Once the House of Representatives passes the bill, as I mentioned, it heads over to the Senate, where the bill is then referred to Senate Finance Committee. So again, this timeline is a little bit adjusted, and this is tentative because it changes a little bit each budget go around. But this is looking like it will be early May that the budget will be moving through, starting to move through the Senate. The Senate handles the budget in a similar fashion to the House Finance Committee, whereas it kind of splits up the different areas of the budget by subcommittee or committee. Sometimes the Senate, this has changed year to year depending on, I think, leadership and various things, but the Senate sometimes deals with the different areas of the budget in existing committees. So there's, for example, a Medicaid and Health and Human Services Committee that would hear those portions of the budget. Other years, the Senate Finance Committee has set up subcommittees to handle these different areas of the budget. Again, this is a similar process to the House. Once the committee or subcommittee process happens, the bill moves back to the Senate Finance Committee. A substitute bill is reported out of Senate Finance to the full Senate to vote on the bill. This happens sometime usually in early to mid-June, and then because the Senate and the House they will not pass the same budget, the Senate will make changes from the House version, and the Senate and the House will have to come together in conference committee to deliberate and agree on changes to the budget bill. Once those changes are made, the House and Senate each have to vote to concur with those changes, and then it gets sent to the governor, and by statute has to be signed by the end of June. So that's the process the budget goes through. As I mentioned, right now, the House Finance Committee is hearing public testimony on the budget bill. So there's this week's schedule, the location, and contact information if you would like to testify or get more information about the committee, and the schedule is available to you via the chairman of the House Finance Committee, Ryan Smith's office. As Becca mentioned, these slides will be sent out, so you'll have access to this email address if you are interested in getting more information. So I'm going to move into, without getting too far into the weeds, I'm going to move into a little bit of discussion about how you can find out more information about what's in the budget. Ohio, like many other states, but maybe I'm a little bit biased, Ohio has a pretty great service available through the Legislative Service Commission. So the Legislative Service Commission is a nonpartisan agency providing the Ohio General Assembly with drafting, research, budget, and fiscal analysis, training, and other services, but we all benefit from the Legislative Service Commission as well. I think they're a really great resource for the budget especially. They also provide bill analyses on other pieces of legislation. So as I walk through a little bit how to use their website, keep in mind that this is not budget specific. You can use this to find information on any other pieces of legislation that are proposed. So this is the Legislative Service Commission, or LSC, homepage. Pretty straightforward. So where the arrows are pointing is where you can access information about the budget bills and related documents. If you'll notice, kind of between those two arrows, that's where you'll find information about bills and resolutions and other related documents to non-budget related legislation. So once you click into this area, you're going to focus on the main operating budget. That's what we're talking about today. That's the process, the bill process that we're talking about. That's the main operating budget that's heard every 2 years. There are a few other items here. The transportation budget happens on the same time or same years as the biennial budget, so odd years, but it's on a much quicker timeline. And then Governor Kasich has been in the routine of submitting a mid-biennium review, so you'll see that there on the fourth bullet point. That happens in the even years, so the off-budget years, where they might make some corrections to things in the budget or put forth additional kind of larger proposals. So once you make your way into the main operating budget section of the LSC website, you can see on the left where the arrow is pointing to which General Assembly we are currently in. This is actually referencing the previous budget. That was kind of when these slides were created, but now we're in the 132nd General Assembly. The House bill, main operating budget is House Bill 49, but otherwise this website looks entirely the same. But you can also, as you can see there, look back at previous budgets because that's often an important comparison that folks need to make. So moving into kind of that arrow on the right-hand side, budget in detail. This will give you line-by-line information on the budget proposals. We'll move into an example of this, but that's where you'll really see, if you know the line item number or what your program that you're interested in is called, this is where you'll find that information that will give you the last few years of funding for that program and the proposed amounts for the current budget. This is what it looks like. So this is line item detail by agency. As an example, we're just looking at the Department of Medicaid right now. As I said, this is not the current budget. It's hard to see these numbers anyway, but this is the previous budget that we used to create this slide. But these look the same year to year. It's pretty easy to track this information. So the information is, like I said, displayed for the previous 2 fiscal years and then the appropriation amounts or the proposed appropriation amounts for the budget that's currently being deliberated. It's also helpful because you can see the percent changes, so if there are increases or decreases to specific line items, you can see that in the percentages. This information is available for every state agency, all the programs that run through the state agencies. It covers both state funding, so the General Revenue Fund, as well as kind of dedicated purpose funds, which are, specified funds for different programs. And then also you will see the federal funding that comes through the state to fund certain programs on this in the budget in detail. The comparison document, or comp doc, is really, really helpful. This is put together by the Legislative Service Commission staff. This is vitally important during the budget process because it takes the governor's proposed budget, compares it to the House version of the budget, compares it to the Senate version of the budget. It's updated throughout the process, and so you can see how different proposals are changed as we go through the budget process. And this is really a vital tool for people engaged in policy and advocacy around the state budget, because you can see how things are changed from one version of the budget to the next. The LSC Red Book, named, as you can see for its title, the title page is red. When they used to have to print them before the internet was here for us to use during the budget process, they really did have a red cover. That's where the name comes from. This is provided with the as introduced version of the budget. So once the governor's budget comes out a few weeks later, these red books are produced for each state agency. And this actually walks through pretty much line item by line item and explains what it is, what the funding is used for, and how the funding amounts may have changed over the past few years and looking into the future. So again, a really important tool for all of us engaged in policy and advocacy to really understand what the line items are funding. It may explain some changes if there have been some shifts or increases or decreases in specific line items. So these are available on the LSC website and are really, really helpful to understand what's happening on a agency by agency basis and the programs that run through those agencies. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Will Tarter. As Becca mentioned, we're happy to answer any questions along the way, but you can type those in and we're happy to answer those. But I will turn it over to Will.
All right. Thanks, Tara, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today. And thanks so much, Rebecca, for allowing me to present on this webinar. This is a very timely conversation. A lot of folks are very interested in how they can get involved. A lot of folks are saying, well, I want to get involved, but I really don't know how. And one of the things that we're seeing in this political landscape is a lot of opportunities for engagement with elected officials. And just this morning, there was an announcement from Facebook about a new feature called Town Hall, where people will be able to look up who represents them in their particular area if they would like to connect and engage their elected officials. So the political landscape, the opportunity to advocate, is dynamic and it's changing by the day, but there are certain principles that carry through regardless of methods of outreach and engagement with public officials that we hope you'll be able to take away from this presentation. To begin, advocacy is really important. We understand a lot of folks are on the front lines doing great work to the community and are involved in public service, and we are grateful for that. One of the things that is necessary, though, is to share the information and the stories that you hear on an everyday basis with those that are in positions of public policy. We know that institutions make decisions in both the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, so advocacy can appear in a variety of forms across sectors. But in this particular instance, government policies affect everyone, and so knowing how and when to engage with elected officials is very important, and that's why we'll focus on government today. Government does control funding for important services, which is why, especially during the budget season, the information that you provide both before, during, and after those funding conversations is necessary. And policymakers care about and they need your expertise. People who are on the front lines or people who are in leadership and organizations who are being able to serve the community, they need to know what's going on. They need to know how policies affect them. And likewise, they need to know how proposed legislation or proposed changes in program will affect you, your organization, your employees, or the people that you serve. The definition of advocacy is public support or recommendation for a particular cause or policy. And advocacy is used in the promotion of a cause or principle, oftentimes that leads to a selected goal. I want to emphasize that advocacy is just one way to approach a problem. Civic engagement, as I say, comes in a variety of forms. There is advocacy, and that does differ a little bit from activism, and both are necessary in public engagement. Advocacy does not necessarily involve confrontation or conflict, however, and that's one thing that we want to emphasize, is that there's opportunities to share information and dialogue. In this particular case, we're going to talk about several communication methods that are unique to advocacy that we hope will be effective in maintaining or opening that communication. So for those of you who may be new to advocacy, you do as an organization, whether you're in a nonprofit or as a private citizen, you have the opportunity to legislate for legislation issues and talking about and educating those public officials on how that proposed piece of legislation affects you. What you cannot do is advocate for candidates. And this is very unique when you're talking about your organization, especially if you're involved in the 501c3, in that you want to make sure that when you are doing voter registration, when you're doing voter education, that it is the opportunity to talk about in a nonpartisan basis how legislation affects you, how issues affect you, but you cannot in particular endorse a specific candidate. What you can do both before, during, and after the election season is encourage people to register to vote. In Ohio, for example, ex-offenders or those who are returning citizens are able to register to vote just like everyone else. However, they must register to vote after they've been released from prison. And this is an example of voter registration and also voter education in talking to people about the specifics of the voting process that anyone can do and any organization can do in a nonpartisan process. What you can't do, at least in representing your organization, is tell people who to vote for. We also want to emphasize that meeting with elected officials, the opportunity to engage with elected officials, is not unique to just election season. You want to engage with your elected officials both before November, during the campaign season, as well as afterwards. In fact, I would argue that civic engagement doesn't stop. Establishing, building, and maintaining that relationship is constant throughout the year. What you want to be aware of is to not attend fundraisers as an official representative of your agency. When you do go to an event, you'll be asked for your name and your organization as a form of campaign finance mandates. However, don't go wearing like your organization pin or a lapel in which you could be confused as representing your agency, or in fact, you're just representing yourself. The question was sent out to congressional staffers on what types of advocacy is most effective. And the question was asked, if your member senator has not arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might the following advocacy strategies directed to the Washington office have on his and her decision? And here are the findings. You'll note, so at the very top, both a lot of positive influence and some positive influence is in-person issue visits from constituents. I want to highlight three particular words that stand out. In-person, visit, from constituents. As you go down throughout the list, you'll see other parts that are a little bit less effective. So contact from constituents, be it a phone call or visit, is very effective because as a voter, you represent a core part of a constituency of that public official. As you go further down in terms of the effective methods, the less in-person communication, the slightly less effective. Doesn't mean that phone calls are not effective. In fact, we've seen recently that phone calls can be very effective. However, when you have like email messages, that becomes a little bit less. When it's a form email, like a script or something, those become a little bit less effective because they lack the power of a personal story. And you'll notice towards the bottom is social media, and we'll get to that in just a second. But in this particular slide, I really want to emphasize the importance of individualized, so sharing your story, messaging. And if you're from a constituent, that is particularly meaningful because you represent a core interest of that particular public official. It doesn't mean that if you contact a public official and you're not a constituent that they don't care or need your input, because in fact, many times they do. However, when you are a constituent yourself and you're calling the particular person that you have an impact on his or her in the election season, that does carry weight. The policymakers find it easier to say yes if you're to your advocacy, if you have these things in mind. Number one, a relationship with your organization. So if they are aware of who you are and what you stand for, you bring the credibility to that particular conversation, and that relationship is something that they will keep in mind during this conversation. If you're coming to them at just the budget process, while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, if you have a relationship beforehand, it gives context to the particular ask of why you're going to this particular public official or why you're making this specific request. It also allows an opportunity to follow up after that conversation because you already have a pre-existing relationship with that public official. Number two, they have reason to trust the information that you present. So when you provide data or you provide stories, data integrity is very, very important. If they use that information in educating their decision, or if they use that information to educate other constituents, the media, or their colleagues, they have to trust that the data you provided has integrity. What you don't want to happen is for that data to be questioned from somebody else as non-verifiable data, because they will end up not trusting the information that you provide to them in the future. So make sure that they have reason to trust any and all information that you're presenting to them. They also need to know who you speak for. This is true especially if you're in positions of leadership. If you're in a position of leadership and you're speaking on behalf of your organization, or if you are a part of an institution, let's say the director of a nursing home, not only are you speaking as a person who is knowledgeable about a particular subject, but you might also have interactions with other constituents or other folks who are impacted by that policy. So when you call, you're not just calling representing yourself, but you also might be building on interactions that you have with, let's say, 500 people. So when you call, again, your words have weight when they know who you speak for. Knowing how you relate to the community and your constituents. Going back to the importance of constituent input, again, not saying that input, if you're not a constituent, is not important, but when you are a constituent, it carries extra relevance. And they also need to know if you have strong media relationships. When we look at the media today, information is shared both at an individual level and the institution level a lot. So there's a lot of information that's being shared today. But if they know that this conversation could also be shared as saying, like, hey, this is an important step forward for seniors or for whatever constituency that you're calling about, and they know that that message will get out through the media, whether it's traditional or alternative forms of media, that also carries a lot of weight in the conversations you have with those public officials. So in this particular presentation, we're going to focus exclusively on 3 advocacy methods: the personal phone call, the personal letter, and the personal visit. You'll notice each one of these steps has one thing in common: personal. There's one takeaway that you can take away from this webinar. It would be make it personal. No one knows the power of your story better than you. So when you examine how to communicate with your public officials, make sure that you include something personal that can make it memorable. For example, the personal phone call. When you call a legislator, the first thing that you should assume is not to speak to that specific legislator. More than likely, you'll be speaking to a member of his or her staff. So the important thing here, be pleasant. Ask for the staff person's name. Not only does it allow you the opportunity to listen to them, as well as gives you the opportunity to write down who you spoke to and when. The information that you give to the staff person may very well reach the legislator, him or herself. So be sure that you're courteous and you're nice to that legislator's staff, because that will affect how your information is received. Let them know if you're a constituent, although phone ID can tell them that already. Again, people's area codes pops up whenever a phone call comes in. It doesn't necessarily mean that if the area code is from outside of that legislator's district that it's not a constituent, because people move into districts and bring their cell phone numbers, for example. But it does mean that phone calls that come in and it has that area code already attached to the phone number, they know there's a higher probability that this is a constituent who's calling. Try and sound like yourself. It's one thing to send out sample scripts for people to call into their legislator and to read over the phone, but it's another thing if you're talking basically as yourself and from personal experience. So, for example, if you're calling and you're reading a script saying, "Hi, my name is William Tarter, and I wanted to share with you some of the importance of transportation." It's one thing if a person is calling and they want to use the script to read off of. That's great. But what you want to do in order to make it even more memorable is the power of the personal story. "Hi, my name is William Tarter. I'm calling because I'm very concerned about transportation. I rely on transportation to get where I need to go in the morning, and I'm concerned about the impact of this particular bill on my route to work, and it also affects how much time I can spend with my family. I urge you to support this particular issue, whatever the case might be. What it means is that not only are you affecting the issue, you're basically personalizing it, saying how it will affect you and your way of life. And if you can share that in that personal phone call, it makes it very, very memorable. Again, what is your expertise and what gives you credibility? Very, very important that people understand what gives you the credibility and the weight to speak. Keep it short. So when you call, make sure that you're clear and you're concise. Share that story. Have a clear ask. Also, be a good listener. If the staff person has a story that they also want to share with you or information that they want to share with you, write that down and be sure that you use that in future correspondence. The next thing is the personal letter. Remember, it's one thing to draft a form letter and to sign your name. It's another when you can personalize the letter. Much like the phone call, relate your experiences, but keep it short and concise. Not necessarily a huge essay if you can avoid it, 1 page, 2 page max. And address just one issue because the person who's reading it, they need to know that that information is critical to that issue. But if you introduce other issues, that may cloud your message. Handwritten is preferred. And the reason is because people don't write letters as often anymore. So when you write a handwritten note, that means you took the time to get a piece of paper, write it down, put it into an envelope, get a stamp, go to the mail office. It's one thing to just type and send an email. It's another to do all those steps in writing a handwritten letter. Very, very memorable if and when a staff person opens it up. Always include your home address. If they want to reply, it could be a form reply or it could be a personal reply, but they need some place to reply to. But always ask for a reply if you expect one. You could just be sharing your views and your perspectives, and that's fine. But if you want to maintain correspondence with that public official, make sure that you ask that in advance. A letter example, the Honorable such and such, the governing body, the address, and please spell their name correctly. For example, the Honorable Congresswoman Marsha L. Fudge in Warrensville Heights, Ohio. Personal visit. Make sure that you schedule the meeting in advance. When you schedule that meeting with your legislator, make sure if you're bringing other constituents that the staff knows about it so that they know how many seats will be necessary. Additionally, make sure you are aware if they have other staff members that they want to invite as well. So it's clear how many seats you need in the room and if the room that they request is adequate. Be sure that you dress appropriately and be on time early if possible. And don't be surprised if you have to wait because oftentimes committee or session will go long. Start with a compliment and thank them first. So thank you so much for meeting with me. I appreciate you taking the time. I really want to share with you my perspective on this particular issue. Be brief, clear, concise on the issue you want to address, just like the phone call and the personal letter. Again, personalize the issue, be a good listener, have a clear ask. Follow-up is inviting a legislator to visit your organization so he or she can have a personal experience in understanding your organization and the work that you do. Last but not least, social media. Don't be afraid to talk to legislators via social media. Many times they have a website, a Facebook page, a Twitter handle, or some other opportunity to engage with their constituents or members of the public. If you'd like to tag them in order to start a conversation or to inform them about a graph or a statistic or a story, feel free to do that. Encourage your followers to share or retweet your posts or talk to legislators directly, especially if that legislator has asked for stories or data to support or defend a particular position. Use graphics, tables, photos, or videos to accentuate your points. Again, it's one thing to have words, it's another thing to have pictures that complement the data you receive. If using emails, do not use all capital letters. And the reason is because electronic media lacks both tone and in-person body communication. So when you read an email and it's all caps, the person reading it, whether it's the legislator or a staff member, doesn't know if you're trying to emphasize your point or if you're screaming at them. So don't use all capital letters if you can avoid it. One more thing about social media. Be sure to remember that if you tag a particular public official, not only can they see what you post, but they can also see the commenters after you. It's very important that you understand that if you post something and other people comment on it, that you might become associated with those commenters. So make sure that you're very clear and concise on what you choose to tag public officials on, because you want to make sure that it's educational and informative as opposed to inviting people to attack a particular public official. With that, I thank you for the opportunity to present, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Will and Tara. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through my slides a little quickly, but as I said, I will email them to you, and these are live links, so if you are interested in following us on social media, I have provided ways to get in touch with Advocates for Ohio's Future, as well as the Center for Community Solutions, who is excellent on Twitter, and their policy team, of which Tara and Will are both a part of, have their own Twitter, so I've put those both up there for you. And again, you will get the link to all of these, so I will just move on to a couple resources I wanted to share. So if you don't know who your elected officials are, on advocatesforohio.org, if you go to the Take Action tab, you can find your elected officials with no more than your zip code. So I just wanted to let you folks know that that was there. If you don't know who they are, that's state, congressional, local, everyone that is in your district you can find just by entering your zip code. Also, here's a couple of other resources that we have for you that I wanted to highlight. We update this page regularly as new information becomes available, so I invite you to come back and check it out in the future. Two that I wanted to speak about specifically are the Ohio Poverty Snapshot Resource Card and our new state budget fact sheets. The resource card is updated annually to show the federal poverty guidelines on one side that are used to determine who is and is not eligible for benefits through public support programs, and the other side shows that most common Ohio jobs leave working Ohioans in need of extra support. And those are available, you can print it off online, and we also have copies that we will send to you if you send me an email with your mailing address. The state budget fact sheets provide background on a number of human service issues in the state budget that we're paying attention to right now, and highlight how targeted state investments in public services and support strengthen Ohio's families and communities. After this webinar, I encourage you to look through our archived resources to see where Ohio has made progress and how we still need to improve. And finally, we have an Advocacy Tool Kit that includes the state budget timeline, some other tips for meeting with legislators and talking about human services, and also a template for writing a letter to the editor of your local newspaper.